W420radionetwork.com.
Welcome back to the conversation today. We got a new guest, a new company that we've heard about that's pretty good size, but we never heard of, but that doesn't mean anything. There's a lot of people that are big in this business and not very well known. We have Terry Ridley, who's the CEO and founder of this company, and she's going to talk to us about what she did to get it going and what challenges that she had getting it. The company is called Civilized. Interesting name. And Terry, welcome to the show.
Dan, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about you, and then tell us about your company, what you're doing, and where you're going.
Sure. Well, let's see. A little bit about me. You'll likely hear this as I keep speaking. I am an East Coast Canadian gal, so you'll hear a lot of abouts. Born and raised on the East Coast. I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, come from an entrepreneurial family. So over the years, businesses in the marketing, advertising, communications, real estate, actually was a television producer, started a television production company, getting me into content. And that 5 or 6 years ago took me to California as a producer, was shooting a show that a group who was working with me, we sold to a Canadian broadcaster. So lived in California, shot the show, and look, that's where the birth of Civilized came about. And it all sort of started living there for a year, being Canadian and feeling and being on top of what was happening in the cannabis industry from a Canadian perspective. Medical cannabis had been legal at that time for about 10 years, and there was lots of talk about moving recreational or adult use legalization forward. And then in California, obviously been a little more forward thinking in that regard. So, it was on the heels of putting the show to bed, looking at what the next step would be. My business partner and I, we started having conversations and really talking about cannabis, being, always interested in kind of challenging, highly regulated industries from the ad and marketing world. I commissioned research because I grew up, I think, like many people who, I was part of the Nancy Reagan just say no and, eggs and frying pans. I bought into the stereotype and the stigma around drugs and cannabis. And so I had to be convinced. So commissioned some research, and what came back that we now all know, but frankly, 6 or 7 years ago, I didn't, is that, the cannabis consumer and the culture around cannabis is far broader. And in fact, cannabis consumers tend to be older and they have high incomes. They tend to have children and own their homes, right? And take nice trips. And, I thought if you consumed cannabis that you were living in your parents' basement with a bong. And I was completely wrong. And so that's a great part of cannabis culture, but it certainly isn't the entire culture. And so armed with that information and then looking at the content, what was out there, what information, there was nothing that could speak to someone who was interested in a conversation around getting off of pharmaceuticals, or is there a topical, or can I sand the edges down with a vape pen and cut back on alcohol? There were just so many interesting areas and such a lack of information that served this part of the community. So we started Civilized to do just that.
How did you come up with the name?
You know what? I love this story. So after that sort of manifesto night where we sort of architected out this idea, it was a couple of days later. My partner was actually working out at Gold's Gym on the treadmill, and he texted me and said, "I have the name." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Civilized." And I went, "Perfect." That was it. That was the extent of our focus group testing. We said it is perfect. It is just so perfect because this industry and everything that had happened for, hundreds of years in the space, it just needed a civilized approach.
Well, we kind of went through the same thing. We were sitting around talking about what we were going to call this show, and we felt that people were looking for somebody to have a conversation with. So that's the idea of the conversation is where we had the American Cannabis Conversation name, and it served us well. People like yourself who've come on the show find it to be not only informative but casual and not adversarial in any way. Just sitting on the couch in a chair, having a conversation in your living room about this important subject. Mm-hmm. Tell us some idea what kind of products and services Civility now has.
So it's interesting. So we've actually kind of pivoted to a broader lifestyle brand. And by that I mean, based on this relationship we've built with our community over the last 7 years, we know that they have so many crossover interests in areas like fitness and wellness, food and drink, those categories. And so what we do is we actually marry mainstream brands who are interested in sort of dipping their toe in this space safely. It's still highly regulated. It needs to be safe. Your shareholders and members of your board need to be comfortable in how you're looking to get into the cannabis and CBD space. So bringing those mainstream brands and then marrying them up with their endemic counterparts. So we're bringing those two worlds together, and that's all based on what our community is telling us. This is what they want. So we lead education first, content first. Everything has to be quality, informative, educational, ideally entertaining. And because we serve this community and listen to what they're asking for, our engagement is incredibly high. So now we're at a stage where they want information on different products. It's so confusing. As you said, the industry is still so fragmented. And, a number of years ago, you couldn't find any information. Now it seems, walking into a dispensary can seem really intimidating. It is intimidating for many people, fantastic bud tenders, but oftentimes you don't know the basics, right? And so then you go to the internet and it can be even more confusing. So we've really tried to build ourselves as that trusted place for you to get quality information. We wrap our arms around the thought leaders and we bring them to our community. And so now there will be an e-commerce part of our business down the road. But this is really about continuing to serve the community, bring them that information. And we're finding that our audience is older. Over 70% of our audience is over 35. So the nature of the questions and interest and curiosity is very different than a 20-year-old.
Sure. You're doing what we found when we did some of our actual research here in Florida is that people who were putting out dispensaries under the new Florida medical marijuana law, as you and I previously thought their customers going to be 21 to 35. After 2 years in the business, doctors telling me looks like it's about 55 and getting older, and they have some patients in the 90s, and it's not just the fact that the older population has more money than the younger population, is that their needs are different, and what the younger people need is not anywhere near what the elderly need or the senior adults. I'm 76, so I don't know what I am, but anyway. But what we're hearing is that in the case of the seniors, the number one reason why they're looking at cannabis is pain management, because the typical medication they were getting from their doctor, opioids and the narcotics and those things, were not alarming but dangerous, and many times they didn't work and they had tremendous side effects. So they've really migrated relatively quickly to try and find something. But in that case, you raised some important point. Right now, if you can't find yourself a doctor, an MD, who's trained in cannabis and how to use it, you're on your own. And even going to a bud tender can be risky, because you may ask, how long have you been a bud tender? You may not. But the idea that there is credible research that's, and this is to me is very important, readable and understandable is very, very important for people who are trying to make significant lifestyle changes, and especially the older Americans who are looking to deal with pain management. But what other things you talked about exercise? What other things do you do at Civility?
At Civilized, yeah. It's
Civilized, excuse me.
Well, yes, no, that's okay. So again, leading with content, it's exactly to your point, and I'm not surprised at all to hear that doctor talk about the average age. Again, it was surprising to me looking at that data many years ago, and then launching into this business armed with that. So, so I'll give you an example. We work because we're not interested in sort of transactional relationships. So when you talk about what we do, we really marry those brands who have quality offering, services, products, and they're trying to connect with cannabis consumers. And, sadly, the challenge now, distribution has always been such a hard challenge, even just being able to get your product across a border, shelf space in dispensaries. And, we've done a different way. When I say lead with content, you're exactly right. Going to our social media channels or signing up for our newsletter, checking out our YouTube channel, you'll see things as simple as small little, 30-second videos on CBD for beginners or cannabis for beginners, where it's truly as simple as the difference between a sativa and an indica, or can you get high by consuming CBD? Really amazing beginner level, easy videos with some animation, all the way up to we have full web series, and Ask a Bud Tender web series. We've done lots of other, to your point, I love your word conversations in your show. We developed a whole series called Conversations With. We have conversations with executives, conversations with athletes, conversations with veterans, all of these series, because to your point, there are so many different ways that this plant can best serve the community. If you are an athlete and you're looking for recovery, or if you're looking for something to do with muscle pain or joint pain, or, if you are a veteran and you have PTSD issues that cannabis or CBD may be able to help. There are just so many fascinating things that this plant can do, and it really can be segmented across so many different members of the culture.
Well, it's been, as you said earlier, time is going to go fast, and it did. We're almost out of time.
Wow.
Thank you. I know. As I said, when you've got talented people like you, you have an interesting conversation. The time just flies by.
Wow.
So, first of all, thank you.
I do thank you, Dan.
Thank you for taking the time, and we're going to have you back on for sure. How would people get in contact with you and what your products and services?
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. I was going to say, look, for anyone in that cannabis kind of curious community, please do check us out. We're livecivilized.com. Sign up for our newsletter and follow us on our social channels. We want to get to know you, understand what your curiosity is, and serve that information to you. And that's certainly from the industry perspective, I can always be connected on LinkedIn, and happy to talk with anyone else in the space. I love this community. It is so embracing, and these conversations, Dan, don't you find that it really is a welcoming, supportive industry?
Hello, this is Dan Perkins for America's Cannabis Conversation, and I want to tell you about a new sponsor, New Frontier Data, and their Equio amazing software to help you discover, engage, and compete in the cannabis marketplace. For the first time, you have the ability to discover on your computer desktop valuable information on state, city, and even zip codes to assess your opportunities for cannabis investment in that market. Through the Engage portion, you will be able to figure out what products in a marketplace consumers would be interested in buying. And finally, with Compete, you'll be able to look at prospect profiles and find new and innovative opportunities to test new products to attract new customers. Significant change is coming in the cannabis industry, and you need to get ready now and be prepared for this fantastic opportunity ahead of you. For more information on the EQO software for your business, go to newfrontierdata.com and look for the EQO section and expand your horizons. I'm Dan Perkins.
W420radionetwork.com